Have you ever felt that Europe holds a secret that doesn't appear in books? As if the entire continent breathed ancient memories, some luminous, others silently buried beneath layers of stone, blood, and prayer. There are places where the ground feels heavy, where the air carries a strange density, as if the past still was awake, waiting to be remembered. The Europe we know is made up of illuminated cities, majestic cathedrals, squares that they witnessed revolutions, art, and progress. But there is another Europe, one that doesn't appear on postcards, an underground, symbolic, and real Europe, where brands invisibles continue to shape the present. Imagine walking down an old street. Beneath your feet, layers of fallen empires. Under these layers, bones, rituals, pacts, broken promises. Every stone is a memory compressed. Each forgotten tunnel is a phrase that history tried to erase but could not got it. Maybe none of this is a coincidence. Maybe you are here now because, on some level, you feel that certain questions insist on coming back. Why do wars seem to repeat themselves in same soil? Why do some regions carry an old feeling of pain, even after centuries of silence? Why was Europe, the cradle of modern reason, also the scene of some of humanity's greatest shadows? If you feel like certain things are no coincidence, maybe this video is just the thing that you needed to hear. Official history teaches us dates, kings, treaties, and battles. But the soul of Europe does not live only in books. She lives in what was hidden, in what was hastily buried, what needed to be silenced so that a new order could be born. Under churches, there are older temples. Under cities, there are forgotten cities. Under speeches of progress, there are memories of fear, control, faith, and resistance. Europe was shaped by both the light of knowledge and the shadow of power, and every shadow it is born from something that tried to be enlightened, but was not. Over the centuries, entire peoples were replaced, beliefs were buried, symbols were given new meanings. What was once sacred has become profane. What was forbidden became heresy. What threatened control was pushed down into the physical underground and to the collective unconscious. And yet, nothing really disappears. Modern science has already taught us that memory is not lost. It is only transformed. A psychology shows that what we repress returns in the form of a symptom, and the story does exactly the same. What is not elaborated comes back. Perhaps this is why today Europe seems restless. Crises appear like echoes. Tensions reappear like ghosts. Old ideas return with new masks. How if something was slowly emerging, rising from below, asking to be seen? This is not a conspiracy video. Not even about fear. It is an invitation to listen. One invitation to look at Europe not just as a continent, but as a mirror of human soul. What was built outside reflects exactly what was hidden inside. During this journey, we will walk through the visible marks of history, but also descend to its deepest levels. Let's talk about tunnels, crypts, symbols, silences, and ancestral memories. Let's unite science, spirituality, and history to understand what really reveals itself under Europe. Because sometimes what we call the past, it's just something that hasn't been healed yet. And as we move forward, let one question echo within you. What if what was buried wasn't trying to haunt us, but us teach? Europe has always liked to write its history in stone. Before words, before books, even before the idea of nation, she recorded her intentions in what seemed eternal. Walls, cathedrals, palaces, columns. Each structure built was not just shelter or aesthetics. It was a silent declaration of power, faith, and permanence. When we look at the great Gothic cathedrals, the impact is immediate. They point towards the sky like fingers of stone, reminding human beings of their smallness in the face of divine. But they also reveal something deeper, the desire for spiritual control. The height, it wasn't just devotion, it was authority. The higher the temple, the further away the faithful are. He felt it from the ground, and the more dependent he became on what mediated the sacred. Castles appear as scars of permanent war, built to resist, monitor, and dominate. Each tower was a watchful eye, each wall an imposed limit. The landscape Europe was shaped by visible borders because, for centuries, the threat was constant. Fear also became architecture. Ancient cities were organized around power. In the center, the temple. Around, the market. Further on, the common houses. And outside the walls, the unwanted. Her own urban organization reveals how society thought. Who could be seen? Who should be protected? And who needed to remain outside? The narrow streets of medieval cities are not or were simply the result of technical limitations. They were strategies. They made invasions difficult. They created confusion. They transformed the space into defense. Europe learned early that survival required constant adaptation, and this left clear marks in the way its people moved and related to each other. Monuments celebrate victories, but they also hide defeats. Statues of generals silence the names of those who died anonymously. Squares that today welcome tourists, they were scenes of public executions. The same stone that supports cafes has already absorbed screams, fear, and final goodbyes. None of this is accidental. European history was built on layers of substitution. One empire falls, another falls, rises above its rubble. Pagan temples become churches. Ancient symbols win new names. What changes is not just the function, but the meaning. Still, the basis remains, as if the past refused to disappear completely. The Renaissance is remembered as the awakening of reason, art, and science. But even it flourished over ancient structures of power. The new had to negotiate with the old. Progress went hand in hand with tradition. Europe learned to advance without destroying fully what came before, creating a silent continuity between eras. Universities emerge as temples of knowledge. Closed rooms, language own, academic rituals. Knowledge also became a form of power. Who held knowledge, controlled narratives, truths, and futures. Reason enlightened, but also excluded. Revolutions changed kings, but they rarely changed deep structures. Palaces were taken, flags replaced, speeches renewed. Still, the foundations symbolic remained. Europe is an expert in reinventing the surface. Maintaining the invisible skeleton that supports everything is intact. Each war left clear marks on the territory, devastated fields, cities rebuilt, redrawn borders. But it also left invisible marks on the people, traumas that passed from generation to generation, inherited silences, fears that they don't know where they come from. The continent that produced philosophy, science, and human rights also produced fields of extermination, brutal colonization, and ideologies of annihilation. This contradiction is not a historic accident. It is a reflection of something deeper, the inability to integrate fully light and shadow. So Europe's visible footprints are only half the story. They are like conscious face of a much more complex mind. Everything that was erected to be seen, it also served to hide something, to distract, to legitimize, to convince. And perhaps the most intriguing thing is to realize that, the grander the construction, the greater the effort not to look down, so as not to hear what was coming from underground, not to remember what needed to be sacrificed for those stones to be there. By looking closely at the surface of Europe, we begin to notice patterns, repetitions, echoes, the same story told in different clothes, the same impulse as dominance, now masquerading as progress, the same search for meaning, now wrapped in technology and speed. But every visible mark points to something invisible. Every external construction is born from an internal need, and if we want to truly understand Europe, we need to go beyond what the eyes see. Because stones tell a story, but what is buried tells another story, and it is to this deeper level that we are about to descend. There is a history of Europe that is not taught in schools. It does not fit into organized timelines or commemorative dates. It's a history made up of silences, calculated, erasures and decisions taken far from eyes of the people. A story that wasn't destroyed, just pushed down, like who hides something uncomfortable waiting for time to do the rest. Each civilization chooses what to remember and what to forget. And Europe, more than any other continent, has perfected the art of selecting memories. Whole peoples disappeared without leaving names. Tongues were silenced. Traditions transformed into harmless folklore so that they would lose their original strength. What threatened order needed to be neutralized. Old religions were not just replaced, they were reconfigured. Gods, they became demons. Symbols have been inverted. Sacred places gained new narratives. By renaming the sacred, power did not destroy faith, it only redirected it. What which used to connect human beings to the earth began to connect them to control. Orders emerged from the shadows, some spiritual, some political, many mixing both. They promised protection, knowledge, salvation, but they always demanded silence, obedience, and secrecy. Knowledge stopped being shared and started being saved. Mystery became the currency of power. Wars didn't just start over territory. They started with ideas, by worldviews incompatible, for attempts to impose a single truth on human experience. Each conflict buried not just bodies but entire versions of reality that had never been, would be counted by the victors. There are files that have never been opened, rooms that remain closed, reports that were classified as heresy, madness, or threat. Europe learned early on that controlling narrative was as important as controlling armies. Who defines the past shapes the future, but silence takes its toll. What is repressed does not disappear. It manifests itself in other ways. Collective fear, diffuse guilt, tensions that seem to arise out of nowhere. The unresolved story returns as repetition. Europe relives cycles because it never completely descended into its own basements. Massacres were normalized. Colonizations were justified. Exploration won the name of civilizing mission. The other's pain was rationalized in the name of progress. Everything. This has left deep marks on the collective European psyche, even when they are not consciously recognized. There are entire cities built on undeclared cemeteries. There are rivers that carry memories of forgotten battles. There are forests that were silent courts. The land remembers, even when the books don't mention it. Modern science calls this environmental memory. Spirituality calls it energy. Psychology calls it collective trauma. The name doesn't matter. The effect is the same. Unresolved past continues to influence present decisions. Maybe that's why Europe oscillates so much between extreme rationality and explosions of irrationality, between the cult of reason and the periodic return to destructive ideologies, between the rights discourse and the practice of exclusion, as if two opposing forces were competing for the same body. The European subsoil is not just physical, it's symbolic. This is where ideas that are not could survive the light. That's where uncomfortable questions were pushed. That's where they sleep truths that threatened established structures. When something is buried over and over again, it doesn't go away. It compacts, wind density, and one day, he finds a fissure through which to emerge. Maybe that's why certain alternative narratives are so uncomfortable. Not because they are dangerous, but because they touch on something that has been deliberately hidden. They threaten open doors that were sealed for historical convenience. This is not an invitation to reject everything that has been built. It is an invitation to join, to look head-on at what has been swept beneath civilization, because it doesn't exist true progress without reconciliation with one's own shadow. Europe doesn't just bear blame. She carries unused wisdom, knowledge interrupted, diverted, spiritual paths, ways of living that could have evolved, but they were suffocated before they matured. What was buried doesn't want revenge. He wants recognition, want to be seen so can finally rest or transform. Nothing that stays hidden for so long, you just want to remain hidden. And perhaps the current moment is not a crisis, but a symptom of revelation, a sign of that the ground is moving, that something old starts to press down on the layers superiors in history. If something inside you is awakening as you listen to these words, stay until the end. The answer may be here. Because what Europe buried, it wasn't just the past, it was a part of herself. And now, little by little, she begins to remember. There is a Europe that never sees the light of day. It begins just below the first stone step, the forgotten cellar, the staircase that descends in a spiral. It is there that the continent reveals another face, a silent, dark, and deeply symbolic. Underground Europe is not just a set of tunnels and crypts. She is the physical materialization of that which has been pushed down into consciousness collective. Catacombs spread beneath entire cities, not as an exception, but as a rule. Under busy streets, bones rest in neat rows. Millions of lives crammed into narrow corridors. Death in Europe was never far away. She always was just below, remembering that everything that grows upward requires something that remains below. Crypts were built not just to store bodies, but to preserve hierarchies. Kings, saints, bishops, and nobles descend to separate spaces. Even after death, Even underground, power needed to be organized. Even in silence, social order was maintained. But there is something more unsettling about these spaces. They weren't just made for burial. They were made to hide. Documents, relics, symbols, and knowledge considered too dangerous to move freely were pushed into these lower levels. Darkness has always been an ally of control. Tunnels connect palaces to monasteries, churches to fortresses, cities to invisible escape routes, some built for war, some for conspiracy, some for rituals. Below the surface, Europe moved in secret while, above, the people went about their lives without know. Subter-cities frogs are no exception. They exist even when little mentioned. Refugees excavated to survive sieges, religious persecution, and social collapse. Entire communities learned to live without the sky, without the sun, without the horizon. A survival required radical adaptation, and this adaptation left profound marks on the European psyche. Living below ground changes your relationship with time. Day and night lose meaning. Silence becomes companion. Fear mixes with discipline. It's not hard to imagine how these experiences shaped entire generations, creating a mentality of containment, surveillance, and distrust. The underground architecture reveals an obsession with security. Heavy doors, narrow corridors, angles designed for defense. Everything indicates an awareness-permanent threat. Europe didn't just fear external invaders. She feared ideas, beliefs, and internal transformations. Many of these tunnels remain sealed. Others were rediscovered by chance. One collapse, a renovation, an excavation. It is always chance that reveals what was hidden with intent, as if the soil itself decided when to give back what was given to it, was entrusted. From a symbolic point of view, the underground represents the unconscious, that which cannot be exposed to light, but which remains active, influencing behaviors, decisions, and beliefs. Europe, by building so much downwards, unknowingly revealed its own psychology collective. Each crypt is a reminder that the past is unresolved, just organized. Each forgotten tunnel is a choice not faced. Every underground city is a confession silent that there were times when living above became impossible. Modern science is beginning to understand that environments shape mentalities. Spaces, closed minds generate specific patterns of thought. Repetition, rigidity, hierarchy, fear of chaos. It is no coincidence that many European cultural traits reflect this long coexistence with physical and symbolic confinement. But the underground isn't just fear. He maintains resistance. Many of these spaces they were used to protect persecuted people, prohibited ideas, condemned books. Beneath the earth, freedom found shelter when the surface turned hostile. Monasteries hid manuscripts. Families hid children. Communities' entire regions survived thanks to the invisible. The European subsoil is also an archive of silent courage. Still, everything that remains hidden for a long time begins to put pressure on the structures above. Tunnels collapse. Crypts are opened. Forgotten cities reveal themselves. Not because someone planned it, but because the time has come. There is an ancient wisdom that says that what is below supports what is above. Up. When the subsoil weakens, the surface collapses. Perhaps many of the crises are not just political or economic, but structural. Signs that what was buried can no longer remain compressed. Modern Europe walks on a terrain saturated with memory. Every step resonates in invisible layers. Every political decision touches old threads. Each conflict reactivates corridors which were never completely closed. Symbolically descending into these spaces is an act of collective maturity. Don't stop glorify the past, but to integrate it. To recognize that no civilization can live only on the surface without paying a psychological and spiritual price. The underground is not the enemy. He is foundation. He is root. It is the place where history breathes uncensored, where what was denied continues to exist, waiting for an honest look. And perhaps by recognizing this underground Europe, we can understand something essential, that there is no true light without contact with darkness. That doesn't exist real progress without conscious descent. That what sustained Europe for centuries does not, it is only in the visible monuments, but in the silent corridors that no one wanted visit. Because it is always deep down that the truth remains. There is something that Europe has never managed to completely abandon: its own memory. Even when he tried to rationalize everything, organize everything, explain everything, something remained out of reach. A silent background that crosses centuries and reappears in forms unexpected. The European mind was shaped not only by historical events but by what these events left unresolved. Modern psychology calls this the collective unconscious, the idea that experiences deep depths do not just belong to the individual, but to entire groups crossing generations like an invisible chain. Europe is a living example of this, a continent where the past never ends. Each unresolved war has left more than ruins, left emotional patterns, fear of collapse, attachment to control, need for order. The obsessive search for systems, laws, and structures are born less from pure reason and more from the attempt to prevent chaos from return. Europe learned early that chaos can be devastating. Invasions, pestilences, famines, political collapses. The answer was to create increasingly complex layers of organization: states, churches, academies, moral codes, everything to contain something that always seemed at hand, on the verge of escaping. But what is too contained begins to press inside. European thought produced great scientific advances, but it also developed an ambiguous relationship with emotion. Feeling became suspicious. Intuiting has become fragile. That could not be measured was discarded. Still, the repressed found alternative ways to express yourself. European art reveals this clearly. Paintings full of anguish, music crossed by melancholy, literature obsessed with guilt, redemption, and meaning. Even when reason dominated speech, the soul continued speaking. In symbols, the European collective unconscious carries a constant tension between light and shadow, between the desire for elevation and fear of falling, between the search for transcendence and the memory of abuses committed in her name. That tension has not disappeared. It just changed shape. Extreme ideologies arise when the unconscious is ignored for too long. They offer simple answers to complex pain. They promise absolute order, purity, salvation, and they find fertile ground in societies that have not worked through their traumas. Historical repetition is no coincidence. It's a symptom. What is not understood returns as default. What is not integrated reappears as a threat. Europe revives its ghosts because he never truly sat with them. Even the European obsession with the future bears traces of the past. The rush for innovation, growth, and continuous progress hide a deep fear of stagnation. Stopping means listening, and listening means remembering. Collective memory is not erased with decrees. It lives in gestures, in traditions, in familiar silences. It lives in the way societies react to crisis, live in difficulty trust, lives in constant need of vigilance. The European unconscious also carries a fragmented spiritual heritage, paths interrupted, mystical traditions that have been marginalized, wisdom that could have balanced reason and intuition, but were dismissed as a threat. When a culture rejects essential parts of itself, it becomes incomplete. It works, but it doesn't feel complete. It produces but does not find peace. Europe built a lot, but forgot to listen. The modern century has tried to replace the sacred with ideology, the myth by system, the mystery by statistics. Still, the void remained. Because the sacred does not disappear, it just changes place. The collective unconscious seeks integration, not destruction. He doesn't want to dominate consciousness. You want to be recognized. He wants to participate in the construction of the present. Ignoring it is ensure that it manifests itself in a distorted way. Perhaps this is why so many Europeans feel a tiredness that is difficult to explain, a feeling of historical saturation, as if they carried more than their own lives. How if inherited unanswered questions? This weight is not punishment. It's an invitation, a call for collective maturation, for look at your own history without idealization and without self-hatred, to recognize both the genius and cruelty, to integrate. Psychology teaches that healing begins when what has been repressed can be named. The story follows the same logic. Until Europe fully names its shadows, you will continue to react to them. But there is a movement underway, a slow awakening. New generations question ready-made narratives. They revisit old symbols. They seek meaning beyond efficiency. Something begins to reorganize internally. The collective unconscious is not the enemy of progress. He is your invisible foundation. Ignoring it is build on sand. Listening to him is creating deeper foundations. Perhaps the future of Europe does not depend solely on political or economic decisions. Maybe depend on a silent reconciliation with your own soul. From a disposition to come down, look, and integrate. Because when memory finds consciousness, it stops haunting. And finally, he starts teaching. Nothing stays buried forever. History can be compressed, hidden, rearranged, but there is a point at which what been pushed down begins to press on the surface. Europe appears to have achieved this point, not as a sudden breakdown but as a slow process of revelation. Current crises rarely come out of nowhere. They are late symptoms of something old. Tensions, policies, extreme polarizations, social ruptures, and identity crises are not just contemporary phenomena. These are accumulated responses from centuries of containment. What before it was kept silent, it begins to find language. The European present carries questions that do not just belong to the now. Who we are after everything we've done. What sustained our progress. What was sacrificed for us to get here. These questions begin to emerge because the answers already old, they don't work. Technology has accelerated this process. Files become accessible. Narratives are confronted. Previously marginalized voices find space. Control of history fragments. What previously depended on institutions now circulates freely, generating discomfort and resistance. Revelation is never comfortable. It threatens constructed identities, requires revisions. It destabilizes certainties. Therefore, many current reactions are defensive. The old man tries to stay relevant, even when you can no longer explain the world. But there is something deeper going on, a symbolic displacement. Europe. He begins to realize that he can no longer live solely on his rational inheritance, that the efficiency doesn't solve everything, that growth does not replace meaning. What structures without soul collapse. Spirituality returns, not as dogma, but as a quest. Young people question models of success. Communities seek belonging. There is a growing desire for integration between science, emotion, and purpose. What was separated begins to ask for reconnection. This does not mean regression, it means maturity. Every culture needs, at some moment, revisit its foundations, not to destroy them, but to reinforce them with consciousness. What was built without integration needs to be reviewed. Current conflicts are often read simply as ideological disputes, but on a deeper level, they are clashes of unreconciled memories. Colonial pasts do not elaborated, transmitted war traumas, fragmented identities trying to come together reaffirm. Revelation happens when the surface can no longer sustain the internal pressure, when the underground demands attention, when ignoring costs more than looking. Europe is being called to listen to what she has always avoided. This call does not come with ready-made answers. It comes with discomfort, with confusion, with feeling of loss of direction, but it also comes with the possibility of real transformation, because only what is seen can be integrated. History shows that moments of revelation are often interpreted as crises, but crises are points of choice. Either the pattern is repeated, or the cycle is broken. The present offers this fork. There are signs of resistance, but also of openness. Museums revise narratives. Schools rethink curricula. Cultural movements question symbols. It is not destruction, it is reevaluation. A painful but necessary process. Europe is being asked to come down again, not to hide, but to understand, to look at your symbolic tunnels with maturity, to recognize both the who protected as much as what he hurt. None of this happens all at once. The revelation is gradual, layer by layer, just like it was burial. Each integrated truth releases previously trapped energy. Every memory recognized reduces repetition. The current moment does not call for judgment, it calls for awareness. Don't ask for eternal guilt, ask responsibility. It doesn't ask for forgetfulness, it asks for elaboration. Perhaps what we are witnessing is not the decline of a continent, but the transition of a historical phase. The end of a Europe built solely on control and possibility of another, based on integration. But this takes courage. It demands listening. It requires a willingness to go through discomfort without resort to old formulas. Because everything that is revealed now is not coming to destroy Europe. It comes to ask, finally, who she chooses to be. We have reached the end of this descent, but not the end of the journey. When we look at Europe as a whole, we realize that it was never just a continent. She is a living metaphor of the human soul, with its cathedrals of light and its basements of shadow, its sublime achievements and its uncomfortable silences. Everything we've seen here points to the same simple and difficult truth. Nothing that was buried may remain forgotten forever. History, like the psyche, demands integration. What is denied returns. What is welcomed transforms. Europe tried to survive by separating reason from emotion, progress from memory, future from past. This worked for a while, but now the cost of this separation has become visible. The ground moves. Structures creak, not as a punishment, but as an invitation. There is a moment in every individual's life when they need to stop running away from themselves. Civilizations are no different. They also mature. They also face crises of identity. They also need to look at what they avoided in order to continue existing in a better way. Complete. None of this requires rejecting European history. It requires understanding it completely. Honor the genius without denying violence. Recognize the beauty without erasing the pain. Just like that, the past, it stops being a weight and becomes a root. Perhaps the greatest lesson of this journey is this. The underground is not the enemy of the surface. He is foundation. When ignored, it corrodes. When recognized, it sustains. The same logic applies to the human soul. By integrating its shadows, Europe does not lose its identity. She deepens it. She leaves of repeating patterns ink-aware and begin to choose clearly. This is the real meaning of evolution. And this choice does not just belong to governments or institutions. It happens in every person who decides to remember, question, and listen. Each awakened consciousness alters the collective field. Each honest look creates cracks through which light enters. If this message touched something in you, don't dismiss it hastily. Allow her echo. Allow silence after the words. Sometimes understanding doesn't come as response, but as sensation. Europe is remembering. And when a civilization remembers, it changes. Perhaps what we call the end is just the beginning of a memory that the soul never forgot. If this message touched something for you, subscribe and follow us. The journey continues, always inside. Breathe calmly and take with you only what resonates. No need to agree with everything, just feel what remained alive. History does not ask for belief, it asks presence. And presence transforms more than any quick response. Walk attentively, listen to the subtle signs, observe the cycles that repeat themselves. The world changes when someone decides to look deeper. And perhaps this decision, silent and intimate, is the true one revolution that begins now. It does not announce its arrival, but changes paths, choices, and destinies, remembering that every profound change is first born within the conscious who listens with courage inwardly.